My father's casket sat 10 feet away, ready to be lowered into the ground, and she was mocking my footwear. The words hit me like ice water. Look at her shoes, clearance rack special. My cousin Jessica's voice carried across the November wind, cutting through the quiet cemetery like a blade. She wanted everyone to hear. She always wanted everyone to hear. And those tears, Jessica continued, her stage whisper perfectly calibrated for maximum cruelty. Acting like Richard was somebody important instead of the neighborhood failure he actually was. I kept my eyes fixed on Dad's casket. The simple one Mom and I had scraped together every penny to afford. The one Uncle Greg had already called embarrassingly cheap, loud enough for half the mourners to hear. My name is Sophie Chen, and I'm 24 years old. 3 days ago, my father died of a heart attack. Today, I'm watching my mother's family destroy what's left of my heart while pretending to pay respects. Mom stood beside me in her black dress, silent as a statue. Not defending Dad. Not defending me. Just standing there like she'd stood at every family gathering for 26 years while her relatives tore us apart piece by piece. Richard Chen died broke and disgraced. Uncle Greg announced to the small cluster of mourners still within earshot. Failed at every business he touched. Couldn't even afford a decent funeral for himself. My hands clenched inside my coat pockets. The cold November air bit at my face, but I refused to look away from Dad's casket. Refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Then my cousin Tyler laughed, actually laughed, at my father's funeral. Remember when Uncle Richard said he was consulting for international clients? Tyler said, making air quotes. We all knew that meant he couldn't hold down a real job. Jessica giggled. The Chen family delusion. Act successful, die with nothing. That's when I heard the engines. Low, powerful, unmistakable. The kind of sound that makes people stop talking and turn their heads. For black vehicles rolled through the cemetery gates in perfect formation. Not SUVs, but actual limousines. The kind diplomats use. The kind that cost more than most people's houses. The cemetery went completely silent. Even the priest, who'd been edging toward his car, froze mid-step. The lead limousine stopped directly beside the grave site. The others arranged themselves in a protective semicircle, and for a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the doors opened. 8 men emerged, all wearing tailored black suits that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. They moved with military precision, taking positions around the vehicles like they were guarding heads of state. The man who stepped out of the lead limousine last made Uncle Greg's face go the color of old newspaper. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that didn't need introduction. His suit was impeccable. His shoes gleamed even in the overcast light. And when he walked toward me, every person at that funeral stepped back instinctively, making a path. He stopped directly in front of me and did something that made my brain short-circuit. He bowed. Not a casual nod. A full, respectful bow that suggested I was someone important. Miss Chen, he said, his voice accented with something European, Swiss maybe, or Austrian. My name is Victor Brenner. Your father and I had extensive business arrangements. I apologize for not arriving sooner, but international travel is complicated when one must respect certain protocols. I stared at him, unable to form words. Behind him, one of the suited men approached carrying the largest floral arrangement I'd ever seen. White orchids, roses, and lilies assembled into something that belonged at a state funeral. Not in this modest cemetery beside the simple bouquets Mom and I had chosen. Victor gestured, and the man placed it carefully beside Dad's grave. It dwarfed everything else there. A statement written in flowers that said, "This man mattered. This man was important. This man was powerful enough that his death brings people like us to pay respects." Your father, Victor continued, his attention returning to me, was one of the most brilliant financial strategists I've ever encountered. His work shaped markets across 3 continents. The firm has been trying to reach you for 3 days, but your contact information was protected. The words weren't processing. Dad, financial strategist? 3 continents? I don't understand, I managed to whisper. Victor's expression softened slightly. Of course you don't. Richard kept his professional life very separate from his personal one. He had excellent reasons for doing so. His gaze swept across Uncle Greg, Aunt Patricia, Jessica, and Tyler before dismissing them as irrelevant. Reasons that are becoming clear to me now. Jessica made a choking sound. Uncle Greg had gone from newspaper gray to ghost white. Miss Chen, Victor said gently, when you're ready, we need to discuss your inheritance. Your father left very specific instructions about your education, your security, and your introduction to the world he operated in. But those conversations should happen privately, with dignity, not as spectacle. He extended his hand toward the lead limousine, a gesture that was somehow both courteous and commanding. I looked at Mom one last time. She was staring at Victor with an expression I'd never seen before. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition, terror mixed with something else. Something that looked like she'd been waiting for this moment and dreading it in equal measure. Mom, my voice came out steadier than I expected, considering my entire reality had just shattered and reformed into something unrecognizable. She met my eyes briefly, then looked away. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible, but it carried in the silent cemetery. Go with them, Sophie. Your father, he would have wanted this. The betrayal in that moment hurt worse than anything Uncle Greg or Jessica had said. Mom had known. Maybe not everything, but enough to recognize that men in tailored suits bowing to her daughter at a funeral weren't here by accident. She'd known Dad had secrets, and she'd still stood silent while her family spent his funeral calling him a failure. I turned back to Victor. I'll come with you. His expression showed approval, or maybe respect. He guided me toward the limousine with careful courtesy, like I was something precious that needed protecting. As I took his arm, Aunt Patricia's voice rose behind us, shrill with panic. Caroline, what's happening? Who are these people? What was Richard actually involved in? I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. If I looked at Mom's face right now, I might say something I couldn't take back. Or worse, I might cry, and I refused to give my mother's family the satisfaction of seeing me break. Victor opened the limousine door himself. The interior was more luxurious than anything I'd ever experienced. Cream leather seats, polished wood trim, and an atmosphere of controlled power that made the space feel simultaneously safe and dangerous. Victor settled into the seat across from me. The door closed with the solid sound of German engineering, sealing us into climate-controlled silence while outside, my mother's family descended into chaos. Through the tinted window, I could see Aunt Patricia grabbing Mom's arm, her mouth moving frantically. Uncle Greg was staring at the limousines like he'd just realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Jessica and Tyler stood frozen, their earlier mockery replaced by something that looked like fear. The limousine began moving, smooth, silent, expensive. The cemetery fell away behind us. I know you have questions, Victor said, his voice gentler now that we were away from the cemetery. And you deserve answers. But first, I need you to understand something crucial about your father. I waited, my hands clenched in my lap, still wearing the clearance rack shoes Jessica had mocked. Richard Chen, Victor began carefully, was not a failed businessman. He was a financial architect who managed investment portfolios worth billions. His official title was Chief Strategy Officer for Brenner International Holdings, but that barely captures what he actually did. The words felt like they were coming from underwater. Muffled. Distant. Impossible. For 23 years, Victor continued, your father advised some of the world's most powerful people on how to move money, invest assets, and navigate international markets. He worked with sovereign wealth funds, private equity firms, and family offices that manage generational wealth. He pulled a tablet from a compartment beside his seat and handed it to me. The screen showed a professional photo of Dad I'd never seen before. He was wearing an expensive suit, standing in what looked like a boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city skyline I didn't recognize. That was taken in Zurich 2 years ago, Victor said. After your father successfully restructured a portfolio worth $3.4 billion. I stared at the photo. Dad looked confident, powerful, like someone who commanded respect naturally. Nothing like the quiet man who'd read newspapers in his worn recliner and pretended his life was as simple as his cover story suggested. Victor swiped to the next image. Documents. Lots of them. Business licenses, property deeds, investment statements, all bearing my father's name and signature. Your father maintained 2 completely separate lives, Victor explained. The modest existence you knew, the small house, the careful spending, the low profile, that was deliberate protection. He wanted you to have a normal childhood, to make choices free from the weight of extraordinary wealth and the complications it brings. How much? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. How much did he leave me? Victor's expression was unreadable. Your father's personal estate, excluding his partnership stake in Brenner Holdings, is valued at approximately $127 million. The limousine kept moving, but I felt like I'd stopped entirely. Like time had paused to let that number sink in. $127 million. While Uncle Greg called him broke. While Aunt Patricia implied he'd failed at everything. While Jessica mocked my clearance rack shoes and Tyler laughed at his grave. That can't be real, I said. Victor pulled out a leather portfolio and opened it on the seat between us. Inside were documents, official, notarized, impossible to dispute. Bank statements showing balances with so many zeros I lost count. Property deeds for buildings I'd passed 1,000 times without knowing Dad owned them. Investment portfolios managed by firms whose names I recognized from financial news. Every penny is legitimate, Victor said firmly. Your father was meticulous about documentation. Clean books, proper taxes, absolute transparency with regulatory agencies. Nothing illegal, nothing questionable, nothing that wouldn't survive the most aggressive audit. He showed me photos on the tablet. Properties Dad owned throughout the city. Apartment buildings, commercial spaces, even the shopping center where I'd bought my funeral shoes. Richard specialized in turning distressed assets into profitable enterprises, Victor explained. He'd identify undervalued properties or struggling businesses, acquire them at fair prices, invest in proper renovation and management, then either hold them for long-term income or sell them at significant profit. The tablet showed before and after photos of buildings Dad had transformed. Abandoned warehouses converted into modern office spaces. Rundown apartment complexes renovated into affordable housing that actually looked livable. Your father also provided something unusual in the financial world, Victor continued. Absolute discretion. Wealthy people often need advice they can't seek through traditional channels. Your father was the person they called when situations required both expertise and silence. Was it legal? I asked, needing to know. Everything your father did fell within legal boundaries, Victor assured me. But wealth at this level operates in spaces most people never see. International investments, currency hedging, portfolio diversification across multiple jurisdictions. It's all legal, but it requires understanding regulations most accountants don't even know exist. The limousine turned onto a tree-lined street I recognized. The historic district where old money lived quietly behind iron gates and manicured lawns. Where are we going? I asked. To one of your properties, Victor replied. Your father purchased this estate 8 years ago. He intended to eventually tell you about it, introduce you to this world properly when he felt you were ready. Unfortunately, his heart attack came without warning. We pulled through iron gates that opened automatically, revealing a massive stone mansion that looked like something from an architecture magazine. 3 stories, wings extending on both sides, gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. This is mine, I asked, my voice breaking slightly. As of 3 days ago, yes, Victor confirmed. Along with 4 other residential properties, 11 commercial buildings, and investment portfolios managed by 3 separate firms. Your father was very specific in his will. Everything passes to you with absolute clarity. No disputes, no complications, no questions about legitimacy. The limousine stopped in front of the main entrance. Victor opened my door personally, another gesture of respect that felt increasingly surreal. A woman in her 50s waited on the stone steps. She wore a professional suit, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression warm but contained. Miss Chen, she said, extending her hand as I approached. I'm Margaret Liu. I managed your father's property portfolio for the past decade. He spoke of you constantly, your intelligence, your kindness, your strength. I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Her condolences felt genuine. Not the fake sympathy people offer at funerals, but real grief for someone she'd known and respected. She led us inside. The entrance hall was stunning, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that looked original and expensive. Everything tasteful, elegant, understated in the way only true wealth can afford to be. Margaret guided us to a library that smelled of leather and old books. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, filled with volumes that looked well-read rather than decorative. A massive desk dominated one end of the room. Comfortable chairs were arranged near a fireplace that looked like it actually got used. Your father worked from this study, Margaret explained. He spent weekends here, managing his portfolio, preparing analyses, thinking through complex problems. He kept this life completely separate from you to protect you, but he always intended for you to eventually inherit everything he built. She gestured to the desk. All of his files are here. Business records, property documents, investment strategies, personal notes about how he wanted different assets managed. He was extraordinarily organized. Victor had taken a position near the door, present but not intrusive. Margaret opened a drawer in the massive desk and pulled out another leather portfolio, this one clearly aged and handled frequently. "Your father updated this every year on your birthday," she said softly. "It contains his thoughts, his hopes for you, his explanations for why he chose to live the way he did. He made me promise to give it to you personally if anything happened to him." She placed the portfolio in my hands. My father's handwriting covered the front. "For Sophie, when she's ready to understand." I couldn't open Dad's portfolio immediately. The weight of it, physical and emotional, was too much. Instead, I looked at Margaret. "Did my mother know?" I asked. "About any of this?" Margaret and Victor exchanged a glance that told me everything before Margaret spoke. "Caroline knew your father had significant wealth," Margaret said carefully. She didn't know specifics. Richard kept those details deliberately vague. But she understood he was involved in high-level financial work that required absolute discretion. The confirmation felt like betrayal on top of betrayal. "He told her early in their marriage," Margaret continued, "that the less she knew about certain aspects of his work, the safer she'd be. Not because anything was illegal, but because wealth at this level attracts attention. Unwanted attention. Dangerous attention sometimes." "And she agreed to that?" I asked, my voice sharp with anger. "She did," Victor said. "Your father was very clear with Caroline. He'd provide for her and for you completely, but she needed to maintain the fiction of modest means. Never discuss his work, never hint at resources they actually possessed, never let her family know the truth." I thought about Mom standing silent at the funeral. About 26 years of taking abuse from Uncle Greg and Aunt Patricia. About letting them call Dad a failure while knowing he was worth $127 million. "Why?" I demanded. "Why let them treat us like garbage if she knew?" "Your father believed," Margaret said gently, "that your mother's family would either try to exploit him if they knew about his wealth or accidentally expose information that needed to stay private. People talk. They brag. They let things slip. Richard couldn't risk that. But the cost," I said, my voice breaking. "The cost was letting them destroy him at his own funeral." Victor moved closer, his expression serious. "Your father made choices, Sophie. Not all of them were perfect. He prioritized your safety and your future over his own reputation. He believed that enduring your extended family's contempt was a small price to pay for ensuring you could grow up without the complications wealth brings." He paused. "But I don't think he anticipated how cruel they would be at his funeral. Or how much that would hurt you." Margaret opened another folder. "There's something else you need to know. Your mother wasn't just passive in all of this. She actively chose her family's approval over defending Richard. She showed me documents. Emails between Mom and various relatives over the years. Messages where Uncle Greg asked intrusive questions about Dad's work and Mom deflected weakly. Conversations where Aunt Patricia made cruel comments and Mom said nothing in response. One email from 5 years ago made my stomach turn. Uncle Greg had written, "Caroline, we're worried Richard's consulting business is just cover for unemployment. If you need financial help, you know we're here for you. No shame in admitting he can't provide for you properly." Mom's response, "Thank you for your concern. We're managing fine. Richard works very hard." Not, "Richard is successful and you're wrong." Not, "Stop disrespecting my husband." Just weak deflection that let the insult stand unchallenged. "Your father saw these emails," Margaret said quietly. "Caroline showed them to him, asking how to respond. He told her to keep deflecting, to maintain the fiction, to prioritize discretion over defense. And she just agreed?" I asked. "She wanted to defend him," Margaret said. "I know that from conversations I had with her over the years. But she was also terrified of losing her family's approval. Terrified of being completely isolated if she pushed back too hard. So she chose the path of least resistance, even though it meant letting Richard absorb incredible cruelty." I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and sharp and focused. Not just at Uncle Greg's insults or Jessica's mockery, but at Mom's cowardice. At her choice to prioritize comfort over courage for 26 years. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Still at the cemetery, I imagine," Victor said. "Dealing with her family's questions. Questions she probably can't answer." I stood abruptly, Dad's portfolio still clutched in my hands. "I need to see her." I need to understand why she let this happen. Margaret stood as well. Sophie, maybe you should wait. Process everything first. Let your emotions settle before. No, I interrupted. I need to do this now. Mom was exactly where I expected to find her, at the small house I'd grown up in, surrounded by boxes she'd been packing. Dad's things scattered everywhere like artifacts of a life she was finally admitting she didn't understand. She looked up when I entered, her face showing guilt and something else. Fear, maybe. Uncertainty about where we stood now that everything had changed. Sophie, she said, standing awkwardly. I didn't know if you'd come back. I sat in Dad's chair, his worn recliner where he'd read newspapers and watched games and pretended his life was as simple as his cover story suggested. What did you know, Mom? I asked directly. About Dad's real life. His actual work. His wealth. The silence stretched so long I wondered if she'd answer at all. Finally, she sat back down heavily, her hands twisting in her lap. I knew he had money, she admitted quietly. Significant money. I knew he worked with important people, managed complex investments, operated in a world I didn't understand. But Richard kept details vague, and She paused, swallowing hard. I learned not to ask questions. Why? Because asking questions meant acknowledging things I didn't want to acknowledge, she said, her voice breaking. Your father told me once, early in our marriage, that his work involved managing wealth for people who valued absolute discretion. He said the less I knew about specifics, the safer we'd all be. And She looked at her hands. I chose not to know. Even when Uncle Greg called him a failure? I asked, my voice sharp. Even when Aunt Patricia implied he was too incompetent to provide for us. Even when Jessica and Tyler spent my entire childhood treating me like I was less than them because of Dad's supposed failures. Mom flinched. I thought defending him would make things worse. That if I pushed back, if I revealed things I wasn't supposed to reveal, my family would cut us off completely. And then where would we be? Where would you be? I corrected. You were worried about losing their approval. Not about Dad's dignity. Not about protecting me from their cruelty. About your comfort. She started crying, quiet, defeated tears that should have moved me but mostly just made me tired. The men at the funeral, she whispered. That was his real world, wasn't it? The world he kept separate from us. From me, I corrected again. He kept it separate from me to protect me. You knew enough to recognize what was happening. You knew those men bowing to me at Dad's funeral meant something significant. And you still let Uncle Greg and Aunt Patricia call him a crook. You still said nothing while Jessica mocked my tears. I was scared, Mom said. Of what? I demanded. Of standing up for the man you married? Of defending your daughter? Of finally choosing us over people who've done nothing but hurt us for 26 years. She had no answer. Just more tears and silence. The same silence she'd chosen for more than 2 decades. I stood, suddenly exhausted by all of it. The revelations, the anger, the years of accumulated hurt finally acknowledged and still unresolved. Dad left me $127 million, I said, watching her face register shock. He owned properties throughout the city. He managed billions in investments. He was brilliant and successful and powerful. And you let your family call him a broke failure at his funeral. Sophie, I'm moving into the estate Dad left me, I interrupted. You can stay here if you want, or you can sell this place. It's in your name, not mine. But I can't be around you right now. I can't look at you without seeing 26 years of cowardice. I walked out, leaving her alone in that small house with Dad's packed belongings and the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. The weeks that followed were a blur of education. Victor and Margaret became my guides into a world I'd never known existed. We started with the properties. Margaret walked me through each building in Dad's portfolio, explaining the history, the financials, the strategic reasoning behind each acquisition. Your father never bought anything impulsively, she explained as we toured a renovated apartment complex in what used to be a rough neighborhood. He identified areas poised for development, bought properties before prices rose, invested in proper renovation, and either held them for rental income or sold them when values peaked. The apartment building was beautiful, modern updates that respected the original architecture, affordable rents that kept long-term tenants stable, maintenance that actually got done promptly. The previous owner was a slumlord, Margaret continued. Minimal maintenance, maximum rent extraction, properties deteriorating while tenants suffered. Your father bought the building for $800,000 15 years ago. He invested another $1.2 million in complete renovation. Now it's worth $4.5 million and generates $320,000 annually in rental income while providing quality housing for 43 families. She showed me tenant files. Families who'd lived there for over a decade. Reviews praising responsive maintenance and fair treatment. Photos of the building before Dad bought it. Windows broken, walls crumbling, a structure dying from neglect. Richard believed wealth should improve communities, not exploit them, Margaret said. He could have charged higher rents, cut maintenance costs, maximized short-term profits. But he built for the long term. Stable tenants, well-maintained properties, sustainable income streams. We visited 11 buildings over 3 weeks. Each one told a similar story: Dad identifying opportunity, investing properly, creating value that lasted. Victor handled the financial education. We met in Dad's library twice a week, and he walked me through investment strategies I'd never encountered. Your father's genius, Victor explained, was understanding that wealth preservation matters more than wealth growth once you reach a certain level. Growing from $1 million to $10 million requires aggression. Maintaining $100 million while generating sustainable income requires intelligence and patience. He showed me portfolios diversified across multiple asset classes. Stocks, bonds, real estate, private equity, even some alternative investments in art and collectibles. Richard never chased trends, Victor said. He built positions slowly, rebalanced regularly, and prioritized stability over spectacular gains. His annual returns averaged 11.8% over 23 years. Not flashy, but extraordinary when compounded over time with proper risk management. I absorbed everything like someone learning a new language. Financial terminology that had seemed abstract became concrete when attached to real assets Dad had built. 3 months after the funeral, I sat in Dad's library reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. Jessica. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Sophie. Her voice had that artificial sweetness I'd learned to distrust immediately. I've been thinking about you. How are you handling everything? I let the silence stretch, waiting. I know things were tense at Uncle Richard's funeral, she continued, her tone suggesting we'd had a minor disagreement rather than her mocking my tears while Dad's body waited to be buried. But we're family, right? I thought maybe we could get together, talk things through. What do you want, Jessica? I asked, my voice neutral. Well, her fake sweetness cracked slightly. I heard you inherited some things from Uncle Richard. And Tyler and I are starting a business, a marketing consultancy. But we need investors who believe in family helping family. The audacity was breathtaking. The same cousin who'd called us the neighborhood failure now wanted money from the inheritance she'd assumed didn't exist. How much are you looking for? I asked, keeping my voice calm. To really launch properly, we'd need about $85,000. But even $50,000 would help us get started. And obviously you'd see returns once we're profitable. This is a real opportunity, Sophie, not just a handout. $85,000 to Jessica probably seemed enormous. She had no idea I could write that check without checking my account balance. Tell me about your business plan, I said. She launched into a rambling pitch about social media marketing and brand development and leveraging synergies. All the buzzwords people use when they don't actually understand business. I let her talk, asking occasional questions that made her think I was seriously considering it. You know what? I said when she finally ran out of rehearsed lines. This sounds like something we should discuss properly. Why don't we talk about it at Christmas? I'm hosting this year. The pause told me she was calculating whether to push for faster access to money or accept the invitation that would put her on my territory. Christmas at your place? She asked carefully. I have more space now, I said simply. And I think it's time for some new family traditions. I'll send formal invitations to everyone. You, Tyler, your parents, my mother. I have some announcements to make anyway. We can discuss your business proposal then. After we hung up, I immediately called Victor. My cousin just asked me for $85,000, I told him. I think we're ready. Ready for what? Victor asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. To show them exactly who they disrespected, I said. All of them. Everyone who mocked Dad at his funeral. I want them to understand the catastrophic mistake they made. Victor's voice carried approval. What do you need from me? Everything, I said. Financial records on Uncle Greg's failing business. Aunt Patricia's credit card debt. Jessica and Tyler's employment history. I want documentation they can't dispute. Consider it done, Victor said. The invitations went out on heavy cardstock with elegant script. Formal but warm. Deliberately vague about what announcements I'd be making. Just enough to ensure curiosity and attendance. I spent 2 weeks preparing. Victor connected me with an event coordinator who understood exactly what kind of gathering I wanted. The goal, I explained, is to create an atmosphere where they realize something fundamental has changed, but they can't quite identify what until we're ready to reveal it. We arranged catering from the best restaurant in the city, the one Dad had owned for 12 years without anyone knowing. Wines from cellars Victor helped me access. Table settings that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. Margaret helped me prepare presentation folders for each family member. Carefully selected documents about Dad's business holdings, property records, financial statements, articles about community programs he'd funded. Nothing classified, Margaret said as we assembled the materials. Just legitimate proof of who Richard Chen really was. Evidence they can verify independently if they choose. The night before Christmas dinner, Victor brought the research I'd requested. Uncle Greg's import business was drowning. Poor inventory management, terrible vendor relationships, customers abandoning him for more reliable competitors. 3 months from bankruptcy, but hiding it by taking cash advances on credit cards. Aunt Patricia's credit card debt exceeded $140,000. Designer purchases maintaining appearances while minimum payments went missed. Her credit score had dropped 127 points in 18 months. Jessica and Tyler had both lost jobs within the past year. Jessica from a marketing firm after repeatedly missing deadlines. Tyler from a sales position after performance warnings he'd ignored. They were living with their parents while pretending to friends they'd chosen entrepreneurship. The marketing consultancy Jessica pitched was desperation in a business plan. No clients, no strategy, just hope that calling themselves business owners would somehow generate income. They've spent 26 years looking down on your family, Victor said quietly, reviewing the documents, while building lives that are one financial crisis away from complete collapse. The irony was almost poetic. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and cold air. I stood at the window of the estate, watching the street, nerves and anticipation mixing equally. Uncle Greg's sedan pulled through the iron gates at 5:30 sharp. I watched them emerge, Aunt Patricia first, wearing what was probably supposed to look designer but read as expensive knockoff. Uncle Greg moving more slowly, his eyes already calculating, trying to determine what all this cost. Jessica and Tyler climbed out of the back seat, exchanging looks I recognized. Resentment mixed with greed. The expression people get when they realize someone they look down on might actually have something they want. Mom was last, trailing behind everyone, her body language screaming discomfort. She knew things they didn't. She understood tonight wouldn't be the reconciliation they probably expected. I opened the door before they reached it. Sophie. Aunt Patricia's voice was overly bright. This house is, my goodness, how did you afford this place? The question was accusation disguised as curiosity. Dad provided well, I said simply, stepping aside to let them enter. The foyer did the talking I didn't need to do. Marble floors, crystal chandelier, furniture that whispered old money. Uncle Greg's eyes catalogued everything. Quite the upgrade from that little house, he observed, somehow making it sound like criticism. I led them to the dining room. The table was set with china and crystal from collections Margaret had showed me. Pieces Dad had acquired over years, each chosen carefully. Dinner started with uncomfortable small talk. Professional servers from Dad's restaurant delivered courses, while my family made careful conversation that avoided the obvious questions. By the main course, Uncle Greg's patience wore thin. So, Sophie, he said, setting down his fork with emphasis. We should probably discuss your situation. This house, the sudden wealth, we need to understand what's happening. My situation? I asked calmly. These resources, Aunt Patricia added. Given your father's complicated history, we want to make sure you're not involved in anything questionable. The irony was perfect. They were sitting in my house, eating my food, drinking my wine, and still implying I was doing something wrong. Dad left me several things to manage, I said, my voice level. I've spent 3 months learning about his business interests. Aunt Patricia laughed, sharp and disbelieving. Business interests? Sophie, Richard barely scraped by. Whatever money you think you have. Let me show you something, I interrupted, retrieving the presentation folders. I placed one in front of each person, Mom included. What's this? Uncle Greg asked suspiciously. Information about Dad, I said, returning to my seat. I thought it was time you understood who Richard Chen actually was. I started systematically. Property holdings first, deeds, tax records, current valuations. 11 buildings throughout the city, each one documented and verifiable. This is fake, Uncle Greg said, but his voice lacked conviction. Richard worked in. I slid notarized documents across the table. Official seals, city recordings, tax payments spanning decades. Jessica's face had gone pale. Tyler's nervous laugh sounded forced. I continued through investment portfolios. Stock certificates, bond holdings, managed accounts with firms whose names they'd recognize. Documentation spanning 23 years of careful wealth building. Then the businesses. The restaurant where tonight's catering came from, Dad's flagship property. 2 other restaurants. A property management company. All legitimate, all profitable, all bearing Dad's name. I don't understand, Mom whispered, and I almost believed she was seeing the full scope for the first time. Dad built an empire, I said simply. A legitimate business empire that employed hundreds of people and improved thousands of lives. He just chose to live quietly. Why would he hide all this? Aunt Patricia's voice went shrill. Why live in that tiny house if he had money? Because he was protecting me, I said, looking directly at her. From attention, from complications, from people who might try to exploit a wealthy family. I paused, letting that sink in. And from family members who would either try to use him or accidentally expose information that needed to stay private. Uncle Greg's face cycled through several colors. Dad was worth $127 million when he died, I said, watching their reactions. Every legitimate penny came to me. The estate you're sitting in? Mine. The restaurant that catered tonight? Mine. The property management company that maintains 11 buildings in this city? Mine. The number landed like a physical blow. Jessica actually gasped. Tyler's wine glass slipped from his hand, splashing red across the white tablecloth. Uncle Greg made a sound like all the air had been punched from his lungs. Aunt Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. That's not possible. We would have known. Your mother would have told us. Mom knew Dad had money, I said, looking at her directly. She didn't know the full extent, but she understood he was involved in high-level financial work. Isn't that right, Mom? She stared at her plate, saying nothing. Choosing silence again, just like at the funeral. For 26 years, I continued, my voice calm and factual, you called my father a failure. You mocked his work, questioned his ability to provide, treated us like charity cases who didn't understand our place. And the entire time, he was building something extraordinary. I opened the second folder, Victor's research on their financial situations. Since we're discussing business, I said, let me share some information about your circumstances. Uncle Greg's import business, hemorrhaging money, 3 months from bankruptcy. I laid out the financial statements, the declining revenue, the desperate credit card advances. Aunt Patricia's debt, $140,000 and climbing. I showed purchase histories, missed payments, a credit score in freefall. Jessica and Tyler, both unemployed for nearly a year, living off their parents while pretending to be successful young professionals. The marketing consultancy was fiction built on desperation. I didn't need to be cruel about it. The numbers spoke for themselves. You spent 26 years calling us poor, I said quietly. Calling Dad a failure. Treating us like we were less than you. And the entire time, you were building lives that are one financial crisis away from complete collapse. The silence around the table was absolute. You mocked a man worth $127 million as someone who died with nothing, I continued. You laughed at his daughter's shoes at his funeral. And now you want that same daughter to solve your financial problems with the inheritance you claimed didn't exist. Aunt Patricia's tears weren't remorse. They were rage and humiliation, the kind of crying people do when they realize they've made a catastrophic error with no way to fix it. Where did you get our financial information? Uncle Greg demanded, his voice shaking. That's private. You had no right. Successful people have resources, I interrupted. Dad taught me that, among other things. He also taught me patience, dignity, and strategic thinking. He showed me through 26 years of example how to maintain composure when people treat you with contempt. I stood, suddenly tired of all of it. You're welcome to finish dinner, I said. The guest rooms upstairs are available if anyone wants to stay. But I think we've said everything that needs saying. Uncle Greg pushed back from the table violently, his chair scraping across the floor. This is outrageous. You invite us here under false pretenses, humiliate us with. I invited you here to share information about Dad's legacy, I corrected. You're the ones who spent dinner implying I was involved in something questionable. You're the ones who called him a crook at his funeral. I'm just showing you the truth you were too arrogant to see. Aunt Patricia grabbed her purse. Dennis, get the car. Jessica, Tyler, we're leaving. Now. They fled like the house was on fire, their footsteps echoing through the entrance hall. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the chandelier. Mom sat alone at the table, staring at her untouched dessert, tears sliding silently down her face. You knew, I said quietly. Maybe not everything, but you knew enough. She nodded without looking up. And you let them treat us like garbage anyway. Another nod. Still no words. Still choosing silence. You can stay if you want, I told her. Guest room is upstairs, second door on the left. Or you can leave. Your choice. I walked away, leaving her alone with the ruins of Christmas dinner and the weight of 26 years of cowardice. 3 days after Christmas, my doorbell rang at 8 a.m. I wasn't expecting visitors. Victor and Margaret had both given me space to process the emotional aftermath of the revelation dinner. Mom had left Christmas night without saying goodbye, and I hadn't heard from her since. When I opened the door, I found a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. Sophie, I'm Lauren Mitchell, your father's sister. I stared at her, my brain struggling to process this information. I didn't know Dad had a sister. That's because Richard and I lost touch 15 years ago, she said gently. Family disagreement that turned into years of silence neither of us knew how to break. I only learned about his death last week when Victor Brenner tracked me down. May I come in? I stepped aside, still processing. Dad had a sister he'd never mentioned. Lauren settled into the library, looking around with an expression that mixed nostalgia and sadness. Richard used to talk about building a place like this, she said softly. Somewhere quiet where he could think, surrounded by books and good furniture and space to breathe. I'm glad he got to have it, even if I never saw it while he was alive. Why did you lose touch? I asked. Lauren's expression darkened. I married someone Richard didn't approve of. Daniel was charming, successful, said all the right things. Richard saw through him immediately. Told me Daniel was using me to gain access to our family's money and connections. She paused, her hands gripping her coffee cup. I was young and in love and furious that my brother would question my judgment. We had a terrible fight. I told Richard to stay out of my life. And he did. For 15 years, he respected my wishes, even though it clearly hurt him. What happened with Daniel? I asked, though I suspected I knew. Richard was right, Lauren said simply. Daniel married me for access to what he thought was family wealth. When he realized Richard had cut me off financially because of the marriage, he became abusive. Verbally at first, then physically. I finally left him 8 years ago, broke and ashamed and too proud to reach out to the brother who'd tried to warn me. Tears formed in her eyes. I've wanted to contact Richard for years. Apologize, explain, try to rebuild what I destroyed. But shame kept stopping me. And now, her voice broke. Now he's gone, and I never got to tell him he was right. That I was sorry. That I loved him. I felt my own tears starting. He would have forgiven you, I said. Dad wasn't someone who held grudges. Victor told me what happened at the funeral, Lauren said, anger creeping into her voice. How Caroline's family treated Richard treated you. I want you to know that the Richard the First knew, my brilliant, generous, patient brother. He deserved better than that. She pulled an envelope from her purse. Victor also told me about the Christmas revelation. About how you showed them who Richard really was. I'm proud of you for that, Sophie. Richard would be too. She handed me the envelope. I don't have much to offer. I'm a high school teacher making modest money. But I wrote down everything I remember about Richard growing up. Stories you never got to hear. Things that might help you understand him better. I opened the envelope. Pages of handwritten memories. Dad as a child, as a teenager, as a young man figuring out his path. There's one story I want to tell you directly, Lauren said. When Richard was 16, a kid in our neighborhood was being bullied mercilessly. His family was poor, his clothes were worn, he didn't fit in. The bullies were relentless. She smiled at the memory. Richard befriended him. Not publicly. Richard was smart enough to know public friendship would make the bullying worse. But privately, he'd help with homework, invite him over when parents weren't home, make sure he had lunch money. Just quiet, consistent kindness to someone who needed it. What happened? I asked. That kid graduated, went to community college, eventually became a successful architect. He tracked Richard down 20 years later to say thank you. To tell him that quiet kindness had saved his life when he was suicidal from the bullying. Lauren met my eyes. That was your father, Sophie. Someone who helped people quietly, without needing recognition, without keeping score. He built financial empires, yes, but he also built dignity and hope in people who'd lost both. We talked for 3 hours. Lauren filled in gaps about Dad's childhood, his relationship with their parents, his early business ventures. She was funny and honest and grieving the same man I was mourning. I'd like to be part of your life, she said as she was leaving. If you'll let me. I know I don't have a right to ask after abandoning Richard for 15 years. But I'd like to try to be the aunt you never got to know. I'd like that, I said honestly. 2 days later, another unexpected visitor arrived. This time it was someone I'd seen only in photos, Chen, Dad's uncle and the last surviving member of his father's generation. He was in his 70s, with white hair and dark eyes that studied me with uncomfortable intensity. You look like your grandmother, he said without preamble. Sophia, my sister. You're named for her, yes? I nodded, inviting him in. Marcus settled into the library's leather chair like he'd been there before. Richard brought me here once, he explained, seeing my surprise. 5 years ago. Showed me everything he'd built. Asked for my blessing, though he didn't need it. Blessing for what? I asked. For leaving it all to you, Marcus said. Richard was worried I'd be offended that he wasn't including extended family in his will. I told him he was being foolish. You were his daughter. Everything he built should go to you. No question. He pulled out a small box from his coat pocket. I have something for you. Your grandmother's jade bracelet. She wore it every day of her adult life. When she died, she made me promise to give it to Richard's daughter when the time was right. Inside the box was an exquisite jade bracelet. Deep green, smooth from decades of wear, clearly valuable but more precious for its history. Your grandmother Sophia, Marcus said as I carefully lifted the bracelet, was the strongest person I ever knew. She immigrated to this country with nothing, built a successful business through sheer determination, and raised children who understood that wealth means nothing without character. He helped me fasten the bracelet around my wrist. Richard learned from her that being rich isn't about what you own, Marcus continued. It's about what you do with what you have. Sophia used her success to help other immigrants establish themselves. She provided loans when banks wouldn't, offered jobs when others discriminated, created opportunities for people who'd been shut out. Dad did the same thing, I said softly. Helped people quietly, without needing recognition. Because that's how he was raised, Marcus confirmed. Your grandmother taught Richard that power is most effective when used to lift others up. That lesson shaped everything he built. Marcus stayed for dinner. He told stories about Dad's childhood, about grandmother Sophia's business acumen, about a family history I'd never known existed. Your father's family on the Chen side, Marcus explained. We came from nothing. Built everything through education and hard work and helping each other succeed. Richard honored that tradition in everything he did. As Marcus was leaving, he turned at the door. The people who mocked Richard at his funeral, your mother's family, they come from nothing too. But they learned a different lesson. They learned that stepping on others makes you feel powerful. Richard learned that lifting others makes you actually powerful. That's the difference. For weeks after Christmas, Margaret called with urgency in her voice. We have a situation with one of your properties, she said. The Riverside Apartments. The building manager just quit suddenly, and tenants are reporting problems that need immediate attention. The Riverside Apartments were one of Dad's first acquisitions. A 30-unit building in a neighborhood that had been rough when he bought it, but had slowly improved over 20 years. I met Margaret at the property an hour later. The building looked well-maintained from outside, but Margaret's expression told me there were problems I couldn't see. Inside, we met with 3 tenants who'd organized to discuss issues. The heat's been broken for 2 weeks, explained Maria Santos, a woman in her 50s who'd lived there for 16 years. We've been calling the management company, but nobody responds. My grandson has asthma. He can't be in a cold apartment. Another tenant, James Wilson, added, the elevator hasn't worked properly in a month. I'm on the 6th floor with a bad knee. Groceries are getting harder and harder to manage. The third tenant, young mother named Keisha Brown, looked exhausted. The laundry room flooded last week. Ruined my clothes and my daughter's school uniforms. Nobody's returned my calls about compensation. I listened, feeling anger rising. These weren't minor inconveniences. These were serious problems affecting real people. Exactly the kind of situation Dad would never have tolerated. Why did the building manager quit? I asked Margaret. Her expression darkened. He didn't quit voluntarily. Apparently, there's been pressure from a development company called Sterling Properties. They've been buying buildings in this neighborhood aggressively. They want this property. And when you refuse to sell, or rather, when the estate attorney refused on your behalf before you even knew you owned it, Sterling Properties started playing dirty. Harassing the manager, bribing maintenance staff to quit, creating problems to drive down property value and tenant satisfaction. The tactic was familiar. I'd learned about it from Dad's files. Unethical developers using intimidation to force sales of properties they wanted. Who owns Sterling Properties? I asked. Margaret pulled up information on her tablet. A man named Richard Sutton. Made his fortune buying distressed properties, minimal renovations, maximum rent increases. Displaces long-term tenants, converts buildings to luxury apartments. He's been trying to acquire this entire block. I looked at the 3 tenants who'd come to talk to me. Maria, who'd lived here for 16 years. James, struggling with groceries because of a broken elevator. Keisha, whose daughter's school uniforms had been ruined by neglected maintenance. Here's what's going to happen, I said. First, I'm hiring an emergency repair company to fix the heat today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. James, what floor are you on? 6th, he said, surprised by the direct question. The elevator gets fixed by Monday. If the current repair company can't do it that fast, I'll hire someone who can. I turned to Keisha. Bring me receipts for your daughter's ruined uniforms. You'll be reimbursed immediately and compensated for your inconvenience. Relief flooded their faces. Second, I continued, I'm hiring a new building manager. Someone who lives on site, knows the tenants, responds to problems quickly. Margaret, can you handle that search? Already have 3 candidates in mind, she said. Third, we're doing a complete assessment of everything in this building that needs attention. Every maintenance issue gets documented and fixed properly. No more deferred problems. I looked at Maria, James, and Keisha. My father bought this building 20 years ago because he believed everyone deserves safe, comfortable housing at fair prices. He would be furious that his death created an opportunity for problems to develop. I'm going to make sure his standards are maintained. As the tenants left, looking considerably less stressed than when they'd arrived, Margaret pulled me aside. Sterling Properties won't stop, she warned. They want this building and the 3 others on this block. They'll keep creating problems until you either sell or the property becomes more trouble than it's worth. Then we need to make it clear that won't work, I said. I called Victor that evening. I need information on Richard Sutton and Sterling Properties, I said. Everything. Business practices, financial standing, legal history, anything that might be useful. What kind of problem are we dealing with? Victor asked. I explained the situation, the harassment, the sabotage, the attempt to force a sale through making tenants miserable. Your father dealt with similar situations, Victor said. Unethical developers trying to bully him into selling properties they wanted. He had effective strategies for handling them. Tell me, I said. 3 days later, I had a complete file on Richard Sutton and Sterling Properties. The information was illuminating. Sutton's company was leveraged heavily. He'd financed aggressive expansion through loans that required constant revenue growth to service. Several of his properties were underperforming. He was facing pressure from lenders to demonstrate improved cash flow. More interestingly, Sterling Properties had accumulated numerous code violations across their portfolio. Nothing catastrophic individually, but collectively they painted a picture of a company that cut corners on maintenance and safety to maximize profits. He's vulnerable, Victor explained. Financially overextended, legally exposed, dependent on continued acquisition to maintain the appearance of growth. So we apply pressure, I said. Carefully, Victor cautioned. Your father would handle this by making Sutton realize that pursuing your property costs more than it's worth. Not through illegal methods, through legal channels that create expensive complications. I smiled. I think I understand. The next morning, I had my attorney file formal complaints with the city about every code violation Sterling Properties had accumulated. Nothing dramatic, just ensuring that city inspectors knew about problems that needed attention. Simultaneously, I contacted tenants in 3 Sterling Properties buildings. people who'd tried to organize around maintenance issues and been ignored or threatened. I offered to connect them with tenants' rights attorneys at no cost to them. Within a week, Sterling Properties was dealing with multiple inspector visits, tenant complaints, and legal challenges that required immediate attention and significant resources. Then I made my move. I called Richard Sutton directly. "Mr. Sutton, my name is Sophie Chen. I own Riverside Apartments and the 3 other properties on that block you've been trying to acquire." "Miss Chen," his voice was cautious, "I've been hoping to speak with you about a sale. Sterling Properties is prepared to offer fair market value." "I'm not selling," I interrupted. "But I did want to give you some information. The harassment of my building manager, the maintenance sabotage, the attempts to create problems that would force a sale, all of that stops immediately." "I don't know what you're talking about," Sutton said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're currently dealing with code violations across your portfolio," I continued calmly. "Tenant organizations filing complaints. City inspectors who are suddenly paying very close attention to your properties. That's going to be expensive to resolve." Silence on the line. "Here's what happens next," I said. "If any further problems occur at my properties, any harassment, any sabotage, any attempts to interfere with operations, the pressure on your company increases. More complaints, more inspections, more tenant lawsuits. Legal but persistent attention that makes your business much more expensive to operate." "Are you threatening me?" Sutton asked. "I'm explaining consequences," I corrected. "My father taught me that the most effective power is applied precisely, not dramatically. You want my properties because you think they're easy targets now that he's gone. I'm showing you that was a miscalculation. Alternatively," I continued, "you could accept that these 4 properties aren't available and focus your acquisition efforts elsewhere. In which case, the sudden interest in your code violations and tenant complaints might diminish." More silence. I could practically hear him calculating costs and benefits. "I'll need to think about this," Sutton said finally. "Take your time," I replied. "But while you're thinking, remember that every day of continued problems at my properties is another day of increased attention on yours." I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt since Dad died: confidence. Not arrogance, but genuine confidence that I could handle problems using the strategies Dad had taught through his example. 2 days later, Margaret called. "Sutton contacted me," she said. "Sterling Properties is withdrawing their interest in the Riverside property block. Apparently, they've decided to focus on other neighborhoods." "Good," I said. "How did you do it?" Margaret asked, curiosity in her voice. "I showed him that pursuing my properties cost more than they were worth," I said simply. "Just like Dad would have done." 6 weeks after Christmas, my doorbell rang again. This time when I opened it, I found Jessica standing there, mascara streaked down her face, looking more broken than I'd ever seen her. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was small, vulnerable, nothing like her usual calculated performance. "Please. Just the 2 of us." Every instinct said to close the door, to protect myself from whatever manipulation she was planning. But something in her expression, raw pain instead of strategy, made me step aside. We sat in the living room, the same room where Christmas dinner had exploded 6 weeks ago. Jessica twisted her hands in her lap, clearly struggling to find words. "I've been jealous of you since we were 8 years old," she said finally. "Not of what you had, of how your dad loved you." I waited, saying nothing. "My father sees me as an extension of himself," Jessica continued, her voice breaking. "If I succeed, it proves he's successful. If I fail, it embarrasses him. He doesn't actually know me at all. Doesn't know what I care about, what I'm afraid of, what makes me happy. I'm just a reflection." She looked up, meeting my eyes. "Your dad knew everything about you. I saw it at family gatherings. The way he'd light up when you entered a room. The way he actually listened when you talked. The way he protected you from our parents' cruelty without making you feel weak." Tears started flowing freely. "At the funeral, when I mocked your tears, part of me was angry because I knew I'd never have that kind of loss. I've never had that kind of love. And that made me cruel in ways I'm ashamed of now." "What changed?" I asked quietly. "My parents," Jessica said, her voice bitter. "After Christmas, they told me I was being disloyal by not supporting Mom's challenge against Uncle Richard's will. That a good daughter would stand with family regardless of whether they're right or wrong." She wiped at her tears with trembling hands. "And I realized they don't care about me. They care about my usefulness. My compliance. Whether I make them look good or embarrass them. Tyler and I could be anyone. We're just props in their performance of being successful family. She pulled a folder from her bag. I brought something. Financial records of my parents' attempts to challenge the will. I thought you should see what they're planning. I took the folder but didn't open it. Why are you showing me this? Because it's wrong, Jessica said simply. Everything they've said about Uncle Richard is wrong. Everything they've done to you is wrong. And I've been complicit in that wrongness my entire life because I was too scared to stand up to them. She stood, moving toward the door. I'm not asking for money or favors. I'm not even asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to apologize, actually apologize, for the first time in my life without any agenda behind it. Jessica, I said, stopping her at the door. If you're serious about changing, about building something real instead of pretending, I could help you find legitimate work. But it would mean earning your success, not having it given to you. Her eyes widened. Why would you help me after everything I've done? Because my dad taught me that people can change if they choose to, I said. And because holding grudges takes more energy than offering chances. Jessica nodded slowly. I'd like that. I know I don't deserve your help, but if you're willing to give me a chance, I'll prove I'm serious. 3 days later, I arranged for Jessica to interview at one of Dad's restaurants. Not as a manager, she didn't have the experience. As an assistant manager trainee, working under Isabella, who had zero tolerance for laziness or performance. If she's serious, I told Isabella, she'll work harder than she ever has. If she's not, you'll know within a week. Isabella studied me skeptically. This is the cousin who mocked you at the funeral? Yes, I said. But people can change. Dad believed that. I want to believe it too. 1 week, Isabella said. If she doesn't show me genuine effort, she's gone. Jessica showed up early every day that first week. Stayed late. Asked questions. Took direction without attitude. By the end of week 2, Isabella grudgingly admitted she was surprised. She's actually working, Isabella reported. Not performing, not pretending. Actually learning the business from the ground up. Early mornings, late nights, no complaints. 6 weeks later, Isabella told me Jessica had potential. If she stays humble and keeps this up, she might build something real. Our relationship would never be warm. Too much history, too much hurt. But there was mutual respect developing, built on honest work rather than family obligation. The unexpected redemption of Jessica made me wonder if other people might be capable of change too. Section 10, Mom's Departure. 8 weeks after Christmas, Mom called. Her voice sounded strained, uncertain. Sophie, can I come by? I need to talk to you about something. She arrived an hour later, looking smaller somehow. Diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical size. We sat in Dad's library, the room he'd loved, surrounded by books and comfortable furniture and space to think. I'm moving, Mom said without preamble. To Arizona. My cousin Linda offered me a place to stay while I figure things out. The news shouldn't have surprised me, but it still landed with unexpected weight. When? End of next month. I've already started packing. Silence stretched between us. All the conversations we hadn't had, all the hurt we hadn't resolved, sitting there like unwelcome guests. I can't stay here anymore, Sophie, Mom said, her voice breaking. Everywhere I look, I'm reminded of Richard and what I failed to do. What I failed to be. Mom, I let my family treat him like garbage for 26 years, she interrupted. I stood silent at his funeral while they mocked him. I chose their approval over his dignity and your well-being. I don't know how to live with that. Tears started flowing. Can you forgive me? She asked. Someday. I'm not asking for now. I know I don't deserve it now. But maybe someday. I thought about all the years of silence. All the moments she could have stood up and chose not to. About the funeral where she'd let them destroy us without saying a word. I don't know, I said honestly. Forgiveness isn't something I can force. But I understand you did what you thought you had to do to survive. I wish you'd been stronger. I wish you'd chosen us. But I understand. Mom reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, worn at the edges like it had been handled many times. Your father wrote this for you, she said. 10 years ago. He made me promise not to give it to you until you were older and ready to understand. I think you're ready now. She stood, moving toward the door. I love you, Sophie. I always have. I just love the wrong things more, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. After she left, I sat alone in that library and opened Dad's letter with shaking hands. My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope your mother had the wisdom to give this to you when the time was right. There are things I need you to know, things I couldn't say while I was alive without revealing truths I wanted to protect you from. I built an empire. Yes, I accumulated wealth, created businesses, established connections. But none of it matters compared to the only thing I got completely right. Being your father. By the time you read this, you'll probably know about my real work, about the money, about the world I kept separate from you. I made that choice deliberately, not because I was ashamed of you or ashamed of that world, but because I wanted you to have choices I never had. Real strength isn't about power or money, Sophie. It's about knowing who you are and what you stand for, even when the world tries to tell you different. It's about making choices based on principles rather than fear. It's about using whatever resources you have to make life better for people who can't do it themselves. If you choose to walk away from everything I built, I'll be proud of you. If you choose to embrace it and continue the work, I'll be proud of you. The choice is what matters, the freedom to decide your own path. Remember that dignity and patience are their own forms of strength. Remember that revenge is hollow, but justice is necessary. Remember that the measure of a person isn't what they accumulate, but what they give and who they protect. Your grandmother Sophia taught me that wealth means nothing without character. I tried to teach you the same through my example. Whether I succeeded or failed at that, you'll decide. I love you more than all the money in all the banks in all the world. You are my greatest achievement, my proudest legacy, my best self made real. Whatever you choose, whatever you become, know that I'm proud of you. With all my love, Dad. I cried in that library for an hour. Pure grief, finally uncluttered by anger or revenge or plans. Just loss and love, and the devastating absence of the man who'd shaped everything I was. The months that followed were about construction rather than destruction. About building rather than revealing. About becoming someone Dad would be proud of rather than someone his enemies would fear. I established the Chen Foundation, expanding the scholarship programs and community assistance initiatives Dad had funded quietly for years. We provided educational support for students from low-income families, job training for adults seeking new careers, and emergency assistance for families facing unexpected crises. Lauren became deeply involved with the foundation. Her experience as a teacher gave her insights into what students actually needed versus what donors thought they needed. Richard would love this, she said one afternoon as we reviewed scholarship applications. He always believed education was the most important investment anyone could make. Marcus Chen joined the foundation's board, bringing decades of business wisdom and connections to immigrant communities that needed support. Your grandmother would be proud, he told me. Sophia believed wealth was wasted if it didn't lift others up. You're honoring that tradition. Even Jessica contributed, surprisingly. After 6 months at the restaurant, she'd proven herself capable and dedicated. She approached me with an idea. What if we created internship programs? She suggested. Let college students work in our restaurants, learn real business operations, get experience that actually matters. I would have killed for that opportunity when I was their age. It was a good idea. We implemented it across all 3 restaurants, offering paid internships with real responsibilities and mentorship from experienced managers. The property's dad had left me continued generating income that funded the foundation's work. Every dollar he'd carefully invested now supported programs that changed lives. Victor remained my advisor and protector, though the relationship had evolved into something closer to friendship built on mutual respect. Your father would be impressed, he said one evening as we reviewed the foundation's first-year impact. You're not just maintaining what he built. You're expanding it in ways that honor his values while reflecting your own vision. The Riverside Apartments situation had taught me valuable lessons about handling problems strategically. Over the following months, I dealt with 2 more situations where unethical developers tried to pressure me into selling properties. Each time, I used Dad's approach. Precise application of legal pressure that made pursuing my properties more expensive than they were worth. No drama, no violence, no illegal methods. Just strategic thinking and resources applied effectively. The tenants in Dad's buildings got to know me. Not as an absent landlord, but as someone who actually cared about their quality of life. I instituted policies Dad would have approved of: fair rents, responsive maintenance, flexibility when families faced financial hardships. Uncle Greg's business eventually failed. He declared bankruptcy 9 months after Christmas dinner. I heard about it through Margaret, who maintained loose connections to my extended family. He's lost everything, she reported. The business, his savings, even his house. Patricia filed for divorce. They're completely broken. I felt pity, but not enough to intervene. Uncle Greg had spent 26 years treating Dad with contempt. The consequences of his own poor decisions weren't my responsibility to fix. Aunt Patricia's challenge to Dad's will went exactly nowhere. The attorney she'd hired took her money for 3 months before explaining she had no legal standing to challenge an estate she wasn't part of. She ended up dropping the case and paying legal fees that pushed her deeper into debt. I didn't celebrate their downfall. There was no satisfaction in watching them destroy themselves. I just focused on building something meaningful with the resources Dad had left me. Tyler reached out eventually, 6 months after Jessica had started her redemption arc. His message was tentative, asking if we could talk. We met at a coffee shop downtown. He looked tired, humbled by whatever had happened in the months since Christmas. "Jessica's been working for you," he said. "She says you're giving her a real chance." I wondered if maybe you'd consider the same for me. "Tell me why," I said. "Because I've spent 6 months watching my parents destroy each other and themselves," Tyler replied. "Because I've been living on friends' couches, applying for jobs I'm not qualified for, pretending I'm too good for entry-level work when the truth is I'm desperate." He met my eyes. "Jessica said you taught her that honest work with purpose beats pretending to be successful. I want to learn that too, if you'll give me a chance." I did. Not immediately and not without conditions. But I connected Tyler with the property management company, where he started at the absolute bottom, cleaning vacant units, handling minor repairs, learning the business from the ground up. Like Jessica, he worked harder than he ever had. Early mornings, late nights, no complaints. Slowly earning respect through effort rather than entitlement. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so meaningful that those who doubted you realize too late what they missed. Richard Chen taught his daughter that lesson through 24 years of patient example. Sophie learned it well. And in learning it, she transformed from someone seeking revenge into someone creating legacy. The family that mocked them at the funeral lost everything through their own choices. Sophie didn't need to destroy them. She just needed to build something better than they could ever imagine while they destroyed themselves through cruelty, poor decisions, and the corrosive effects of their own negativity. That's the real measure of success. Not what you take from your enemies, but what you build despite them. Not who you defeat, but who you help. Not what you accumulate, but what you give and who you protect. Richard Chen understood that. Sophie learned it. And together, father and daughter proved that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in lives changed, communities improved, and dignity restored to people who desperately needed both. If this story moved you, reminded you that character matters more than money, or inspired you to think about what legacy really means, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because these lessons matter, and they deserve to be passed forward.